morning, everybody, and welcome and thank you for attending today's session, Opening the Brain Boxes with Carmen Cron-Schotes. I'm Denise Milne, co-chair of the FASD Cross-Ministry Committee in Alberta, and it's quite a pleasure to have Carmen with us today. This is the first of a series of 14 learning sessions for 10-11, and so Carmen is going to be presenting one of 3 of the 14, so we're quite excited that Carmen is here. But before I introduce Carmen, there's a few housekeeping tips we need to address. One, Erin's already indicated that it's really important that you mute your mics. That's because there's so much traffic and so many sites involved in this session. Also, Erin's indicated that when we do the questions and answers, she will call your site specifically so we don't have too many traffic jams on the system. If you experience any technical difficulties, please let your local site coordinator know and they'll follow up accordingly. If you have questions, again, we'll answer them through the Q&A process. And further information about Carmen can be found on the handout that you would have all received via email. Evaluations for the session will be emailed to the participants, so please be sure that you sign up on the attendance sheets that are provided in each of your rooms. So as you know, we've really focused through the cross-ministry work on education and training in Alberta. We feel it's a really critical aspect of the 10-year strategic plan that Alberta has. And so video conferencing has become one of the means in which we can address learning through rural and remote sites as well as outside the province of Alberta. And so we're pleased to have the various other jurisdictions involved. Again, we've had tremendous interest over the past 3 to 4 years on this initiative, and we hope to continue to grow it. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Carmen. Carmen has served as a behavioral consultant for the Cognitive Disability Strategy of Saskatchewan since 2007. She's worked for 10 years in areas of economic justice, adult education, spiritual care for people with disabilities. She has a strong background in visual and performing art. Carmen now approaches prevention, intervention, and public education and FASD resource development with plenty of creativity, and that's much appreciated in this growing field. As a consultant in functional behavioral assessments, Carmen's FASD resources are strength-based, which is lovely, a great focus, and she employs a lot of really positive and non-aversive strategies. So we are thrilled in Alberta to have Carmen with us today. Carmen.
Thanks, Denise. I am equally thrilled to be here. This whole system is just amazing to me. When I moved to Indiana in 1997, I had never seen email before. That was my first home computer and my first internet into my home. And I was able to keep in touch with my family so closely in first semester that when we finally got together at Christmas, it was like no time had passed. We were all up to date and everything. So my hope is that with this type of technology and this ongoing communal collective conversation, that no time is lost between the conferences when we are all physically together. This is truly collaborative work. What we're doing here in these 3 sessions is the result of a conversation, and it is an ongoing dialogue. I'm responding to the feedback that I've been given, feedback that has made my work more effective, more practical, more realistic, and we will continue to collaborate that way so that we come up with tailor-made strategies for supporting those with an FASD. So thank you for inviting me to be here in this particular way. I am glad to be the one to travel so that those of you who are far and away are able to stay home and not have to take 3 or 4 days off work to come. This is fantastic. So as Denise said, I'm a behavior consultant with the Cognitive Disability Strategy. And when the government came up with an autism strategy with their own consultants, so many of my autism clients went to receive services from that direction that I was able to focus my attention on FASD. And what a wonderful, unexpected surprise that was for my career. It just breathed new life into what I do, and I feel so inspired and so challenged to be working alongside all of you in support of those with an FASD. Our session goals for today are to understand the regional brain function, the way the brain works regionally, and then what happens when that is prenatally exposed to alcohol. We need to know the job description, so that when nobody shows up for work, we know how to put a sub in place, right? The job description of the region itself. Our second goal is to interpret all behavior as a function of the brain. And I know we're all there. For those of us who have attended any kind of conference or read any kind of book, we're already there that all behavior is brain-based. But there are some remarkable beliefs and metaphors about the brain itself that kind of shape the interventions that we use, and we want to get to the bottom of some of those. And really, to equip those we serve with the understanding of their own brain so that they can begin advocating for themselves, that this isn't just bad behavior, it's not immoral, it's not, I'm not purposely antisocial, this is brain-based behavior and this is what I need in order to live well, to equip those we serve with that information. And finally, to identify external support strategies for long-term care, long-term integrated care. This is a lifetime brain injury. It needs long-term support, long-term integrated support. External brain is often an external team. So those are our goals for today. I take very seriously Diane Melbourne's challenge to stop trying harder. And Brain Boxes is just my way of doing that. I don't have anything to sell. I haven't published a book on this yet. I don't have any products. This is just my encouragement to you that we continue coming up with really specific strategies for supporting FASD. I don't know about you, but I'm really tired of taking autism strategies and making them fit. Right? And there's overlap, absolutely, but sometimes we need tailor-made things for the disability, and that's all this is. Brain Boxes is just my way of doing it. My conviction that we need to teach brain function to people who are affected by prenatal exposure. So why are these goals even necessary? If we're going to continue moving in Diane Melbourne's direction, if we're going to continue trying something different, these goals, we have to know why this is important. What's the reason behind it? The reason behind it is because we have bad days, and sometimes we need new things to help us get through those. I had a bad day with a group of kids. There was complaining and lying and gossiping and negativity and sarcasm and non-compliance and defiance and opposition and all of that. And I just said, girls, knock it off. One by one, I was saying, hey, stop, hold, wait, don't, give that a second. Like I was doing all the prompting. I didn't have time to teach because I was so busy prompting their verbal behavior. And then all of a sudden, one little girl, her name was Christina, she wasn't little, she was like 14. She goes, she was prenatally exposed to alcohol, and she says, you know, it's almost like I don't have any filters in my head. And I went, yes. I'll be right back. And I ran to the staff room and I said, I need coffee. And they said, like a cup of coffee? And I said, no, the filter. And I took the coffee filter basket and I ran back to the room and I said, look, all the stuff that's coming out of your mouth is like this. The gossip, the lying, the sarcasm, the opposition. This is all the junk that I don't want to hear. Now, here's your coffee filters. What I want you to do is write in the coffee filter all the stuff that you would like to catch today before it gets out. And this was in the Catholic school system. And so they said, you mean like swear words too? And I said, yeah, even the swear. So we had our coffee filters full of all of the things that should be caught. Because you know what? They needed a metaphor. And Christina gave it to me. She said, it's like a filter. Yes, Christina, it is like a filter. Because if I had said to them, you know what, you're operating on the reflexive brain function that you have, and you need executive functioning up in your frontal lobe in order to regulate that, because that's part of what we're supposed to do as we grow and evolve. They don't understand, that doesn't mean anything. She needed a filter. And then throughout the morning, so effective was this metaphor that they began prompting each other rather than me doing it. And I went from being a prompter, hey, wait, stop, don't even let that get out of you. I went from that to saying, good job, because I saw it. There was something that would have inspired some sort of snippy remark, and she went, oh, and I saw it. I said, hey, good job. I went from being the prompter to being the praiser, which was a wonderful turn. Kids will give us metaphors. People, we use metaphors, and we need to be listening into those metaphors and creating therapeutic strategies around them We have remarkable insight into this mysterious organ inside our skull, and we need to be listening for the metaphors and then follow them. That's the development of their own unique dictionary, right? It's like there's big gaps in my brain. Neurologically, there might be. It's like sometimes the connection isn't made. Yeah, we can test that with an EEG, right? We use these metaphorical words to describe our own inner functioning. We need to listen for those things. Now, there are some metaphors that are less helpful than others, and that's where we're going to start today, is on some of the metaphors that guide our practice. If we're going to continue moving down Diane Melbourne's path and stop trying so darn hard and start trying things differently, we're going to need the reasons for why it's important. So there's a couple of those. Some of the slides are geared toward people living with the effects of an FASD, and others are geared toward those who provide service. We're going to do a regional overview of the brain, but today specifically we're going to look at brainstem behaviors, brainstem and midbrain behaviors. There'll be slides on that. In particular, we're going to look at behavior and reward, which is lodged in that particular section, and behavior and threat, which is also part of that whole system. And finally, we're going to conclude with some brainstem strategies. As these sessions go on, session 2 and session 3, we're going to come up with strategies for each regional part. In my opinion, my apologies, Dr. Claren, an external brain is too vague. I think we need external brain strategies that are tailor-made for the part that's deficient and let the other parts go, because that's where our strengths are, right? Sometimes the occipital lobe, the part that's responsible for vision and imagination and pictures, is relatively spared. Let's teach to that part. Let it go. This is you. This is what makes you amazing. And now I'm just going to support the parts that you need it. I'm deeply committed to that. So that's our agenda for this morning. Who is Brain Boxes for? Well, those two people, and that's what this initiative is all about, right? The person living with an FASD and those who support them. To the people living with an FASD, this is what you're capable of, that bar. And those are the current limits of your disability, right there. These are the people who help you when you hit those limits. I am primarily concerned with that overlap. Why is it so big? Sometimes. Why is it so small? Sometimes, right? Using your hands on your lap, whether you're a person living with an FASD or a service provider, just create the overlap that you see yourself providing. How far intertwined are you in the lives of the people that you serve or the people who are there to support you? How overlapped are you? I'm working it like this. Oh no, there's that one client. Okay, I'm a little deeper, a little deeper involved. Okay, but I'm concerned about the overlap. Why is it there? Why is it there to the extent that it is? Dr. Tom Feeney says that people think that he's a jerk because when he approaches a child sitting in a wheelchair who drops their pencil, he doesn't pick it up automatically. Because he says if the limits of their disability are physical, that says, you know, they can't reach over and pick up the pencil, but they're able to talk and say, excuse me, Dr. Feeney, can you get my pencil? That's the limit of their disability. And until they reach that point, yeah, you bet, you can't bend, sure, I'll get that for you. And you bend over and you get it. That's the point where I'm going to start supporting you. But if, ooh, look, a child's in a wheelchair, I better get their pencil. And they don't have to ask for anything. That's not supporting them in a way that allows them to reach that full potential. Brain Boxes is concerned about that gap. And what it does is it teaches people with an FASD how their brain works so that they can become their own advocate and their own regulator to the extent that they're able. Here, Dr. Tom Feeney. Single most important aspect of human development and people with disabilities is teaching self-regulation. Now, there's all kinds of red flags going off. We're going to get to those red flags. Logical ones, like executive functioning. There are a lot of people that taught me things about why we need to learn about the brain. Alex told me that she needed a way to describe herself to herself. And she was on the brink of an FASD diagnosis. And she said, I promise you, I'm not, she said, I don't know what it is. We were actually thinking bipolar. She said, I promise you I'm not going to use it as an excuse, but I need to understand how this works. She was already living with the effects of the secondary disability effects. She was already deeply depressed. Jessica produced a handbook, came home from Dojack, a rehab center, and had a handbook to her brain. I have illustrations from that handbook here in your slides. It is incredible. Riley taught me about this use of metaphor because he had analogies for everything and had a way of describing his brain that were remarkably close to his medical file, right? And it was all analogies and symbolism. Kyle taught me that when it comes to behavioral interventions, one size does not fit all. And we're going to get to that in session 3. One size does not fit all. And I have some really fun reinforcement behavioral intervention things coming up in session 3. I learned that from Kyle. From Jared, I learned the importance of strength-based planning to take those parts that are relatively preserved when prenatally exposed to alcohol and capitalize on them. Just build opportunities around them, and then how to provide meaningful support to the parts that are struggling. And finally, there was David. The story that I'm wanting to tell is about David, who taught me something about the importance of the person we're serving to be around the table and to participate in the goal setting. I know all of you know this, but here's one story. We were sitting around a boardroom table. I was just filling in for somebody. It was the end of June. We were just trying to get this kid through grade 10 and just finish up with some sort of activity or a project, work on a goal or whatever, and that was my job, to spend my time with him. That was my first meeting with him. We were sitting around this boardroom table, and there was, like, many agencies were around, and the school division was there, and coming up with his goals and what motivates and what the timeline looks like, and you know, his PPP goals and things like that. And I looked at him, this hat down low, and I said, hey, buddy, there's a lot of people working on your behalf here. I said, what's your job? But it went unsupported, and so we didn't go to my job, your job. We just continued on giving each other assignments, and I went off with David. The next morning, we showed up at the Agribition Center, and we were to be cleaning stalls together. That was our project. And it wasn't long before he was ready to be done. He just chucked his pitchfork down. He's like, I'm out of here. And I said, but David, what about your goals? And his goal was to be perseverance. It was to stick through, you know, a class period or a morning. Our goal was actually to get him through to noon. He said, those aren't my goals. And he was absolutely right. They weren't his goals. Well, I said, so what are your goals? And of course, I'm not going to get that out of a 16-year-old or however old he was. So I got 5 more minutes of work out of him. But in that 5 minutes, he chucked poop at me. He chucked horse manure at me. I'm like, no. So I chucked horse manure back at him. And all of a sudden we had a game going. And that sense of threat, like, hey lady, you know, how much are you going to tell me I have to, that power struggle was gone. We're chucking horse manure at each other, right? So we started to play around a little bit, and as we were playing, he started to talk. And he started talking about his dad, who is a construction worker, and he says, you know, a real man works until the job is done. He said, my dad doesn't work on a clock. He doesn't work till noon. He works when it's sunshiny. He works during the summer, and he works hard. And then when he's done, then he comes home. And I got that sense that was motivating for him. That was his hero. I was like, okay. So I said, I'll tell you what, how about we work to finish 5 stalls? There was like 12. I said, let's get 5 stalls done, or 11:30, whichever comes first. When we were done, it was 2 o'clock, because we just kept working. And then we went out for burgers, and I dropped him off at home. He wasn't motivated by the clock. That's not how his brain worked. His brain was motivated by the task. So that's how we developed his plan in the moment. And then I had to go report back to his team how things had changed. He needed to be around the table, and we need to be around the table. And I'm hoping that people with an FASD are able to participate in these conferences as well for that very reason. Here's some of the metaphors that don't work. This obviously didn't work for David. That the brain is a machine. It's faulty. There's some wiring problems, but we can fix it. What do you do to a computer that's broken down? You rewire it. You maybe replace some parts. You override its systems. Tell me if that's not what we're doing with people with an FASD, overriding their systems. And with what? Well, you know, if over-prompting them doesn't work, then there's always coercion, manipulation, fear, timeout, and the adult version of timeout, which is incarceration, right? You're a program and you're a computer and we're going to reprogram you. The methods that follow this kind of metaphor can be incredibly aversive, and I'm totally against aversive interventions for people with disabilities. The message is, I'll train you, and the legacy of it is failed self-regulation. You don't regulate. I am not in the business of creating robots. I don't care how well behaved a class is or a client is, if that is the result of me controlling their life. I've got my life to live. I don't want to live two lives, and I want you to live to your fullest potential, right? Failed self-regulation. So those of us in this room and in this virtual room have probably come around to the point where we understand that all behavior is brain-based, especially with regard to an FASD. But a lot of times our clients aren't sitting at the tables with us, and we have to make up strategies in the stall, right? It's a secret. We all know it, but are we sharing it? Are we teaching children and adults and youth about their brain? You take a kid with cancer, and they sound like a third-year university student with their knowledge of their bodily systems. They look at an MRI and they're not frightened by it. They use the language that their mums and dads and doctors are using because they're equipped with the knowledge about the part of their body that's not working. FASD, this is the part. And it needs to be educated. We need to share that information. It's not a secret. And it's amazing how much curiosity that creates. Like, wow, what part of my brain is responsible for dreaming? Like, I get those kinds of questions, like once we start talking about the parts and the jobs. It's not a secret. The practice of this can still be rather if not controlling, over-prompting, right? Too much overlap. The message is, I'll do your thinking for you. So instead of saying, where do you need to be right now? Or what's your job right now? Or what does the schedule say? We say things like, sit down, take out your lunch, eat your lunch, wash your hands. Those are commands instead of questions, which fosters self-regulation. Can I listen to my MP3 player right now? I could say no, and you could fight with me. Or I could say, what does the schedule say? It's math. Do we listen to MP3 during math? No. Okay. He just answered his own question and practiced self-regulation because I asked a question instead of delivering a lecture. I know why he's asking, but I need to share with him so that he can become his own advocate. So the method of brain boxes is to say, this is yours. I think this belongs to you. How can we collaborate? And the legacy is self-regulation. But this is not as easy as a cartoon because it requires a huge change in practice. The shift from lecturing to asking questions instead. How do we fix that overlap of over-supporting? We need to work on a least to most prompt hierarchy. So let's say a young adult knows how to write the check, get it to the landlord, get the receipt, and go to social services with the receipt to get their monthly income supplement. They know how to do all of that, but they don't remember the date. Guess where our prompting is? Just the date. Hi, it's Mom. You know that it's the 29th, right? Okay, good, talk to you later. They know all the other steps follow. But let's say that they require more than that. They struggle with the date, writing the check, getting it to the landlord. They're going to need help with those parts. If they need help getting to social assistance, but they do all the other parts, say, hey, have you gotten your receipts to your social worker yet? Okay, well, I'll come pick you up and I'll give you a ride, right? That's where the prompt intervention happens. That's one of the ways to reduce this big overlap. Reinforcing goal-directed attempts. So often in North America, we only congratulate full-blown success, right? It's either perfect or it's not good enough. And I think we need to start saying, that was good. You know what? If a kid scraps on the playground within the first 2 minutes, and they come in, they're hauled into the principal's office, and they made it 14 minutes into recess, that deserves praise. Now, you'll get opposition because people will say, well, you're just rewarding bad behavior. No, I'm not. I'm rewarding behavior that was better than yesterday, right? We need to start reinforcing goal-directed attempts. We're going to talk a lot about reinforcement yet. I love this quote. A good coach doesn't play the game herself, right? We're coaches. So that's one of the ways to say, hi, I think this belongs to you. Number one reason to learn your brain is because it's yours. Following that change in thinking, that change in paradigm, which Diane Melvin encourages us to do, ethics follow. It is a good thing to reject the computer metaphor. It is right to share information about the brain with our clients. The brain belongs to an owner who needs to learn how to use it. We are not in the business of just simply manipulating the surface. We need to go deeper than that. The number two reason to learn your brain is because brain is driving your behavior. Now, how is it driving? What is the connection between brain and behavior? Some of the hunches throughout history is that behavior is driven by free will. But that presumes too many things, right? Is it really a choice if we didn't know we had one? People who say to me, well, I didn't know that service was offered and now the application date has passed. Is that free choice? That's lack of information. Is it free will if the behavior is driven by a reflexive impulse in the brain? I didn't mean to hit him as hard as I did, but there was something in my body that took over. Is that free will? I don't know. I'm not making judgments on that. I'm just saying there's problems with that hunch. Brentro and William Glasser will say that behavior is driven by basic needs. All behavior has a purpose. The purpose behind it is to have one of these needs met. You're familiar with all of that. Some will say that these are evolutionary reflexes, that it's driven by our need to procreate and to feed ourselves and to be safe and so on. A need for stimulation, the need for input. You take some of the children in orphanages in Romania who have had no stimulation, and you know what happens to them? They die. That's how bad the craving is in human beings, that we need stimulation and interaction. We will either experience a symbolic death, where we might as well be dead, a depression so deep, we need that kind of input, or actually we can physically become ill and die. Some will say that brain is motivated by chemistry and electricity, and as we talk more about the brain, I am definitely leaning in that direction. The missing motivation that FASD has taught us is brain dysfunction producing inexplicable behavior. And the idea is probed with the question, why do hungry cats kill birds? Why do well-fed domestic cats kill birds? Why do children who are well-fed and the fridge is full and food isn't an issue stuff their mouths? Why do they hoard food? Why are there cookies under your mattress? Why did you go through someone else's lunch and take their sandwich? You're well fed, you've got a lunch. The hunch behind that is that there is something deeper neurologically that still feels good or rewarding or regulating, that it somehow regulates our system. And that is so hard to explain to people who aren't functioning actively in the FASD world, because there's just no allowance for that kind of thing. Now, this is probably a tangent, but I need to say it. My biggest problem with advocating for brain-based behavior is that so many behaviors belonging to FASD are already the property of other conclusions. We have conclusions in our culture for what it is to tell something that's not true. What's it called? It's called a lie. What's it called when you take something that's not yours? It's called stealing, right? What's it called when you have sex with a bunch of guys? It's called promiscuity, promiscuous, exactly. And a lot of those names belong to our, our faith communities, to they are moral, ethical, built into the fiber of our culture. And it is so difficult to advocate for people when you believe that those behaviors are driven by something else. Is it a lie, or is it an intrusive error? An intrusive error means that you insert something that's not there. And you can do this kind of test with like stuff on a cookie sheet and just say, here's 10 items. I'm going to say them out loud to you, take this away. Kids with an FASD will sometimes insert up to 7 more items. It's not a lie. It's an intrusive error. Stealing. I learned this from a group that was running an FASD camp. And they had a little guy who was prone to snooping through other people's stuff and taking, he always had stuff that didn't belong to him on his person. And instead of saying that it was stealing, they called it squirreling. And that was just code language for what he was up to. But there was so much respect in it that we don't quite have a word for it yet, but we don't want to call it theft. So we're going to call it squirreling. And it fit him. It was just this, oh, he's squirreling again. Like weird stuff, like, you know, an 8-pack of toilet paper that he had hidden, that kind of thing. So our FASD behaviors are already the property of other moral decisions. And that's a tough bill to advocate. That's my tangent. Now, here's the self-regulation pickle. When we said before that the goal of supporting people with disabilities is ultimately self-regulation, to live up to the extent of your full potential. If you can ask for me to pick up your pencil, you will be required to do that before I pick up your pencil. If you are capable of paying your rent and getting the receipt, you will be required to move up to that point, and then I'll drive you to your appointment, right? That's the extent of self-regulation that I'm not talking about full-blown self-regulation, because there's capacities that aren't there for that. But to the extent that you are able, that is the extent I expect. And then I will support you at that point. And of course, that ability is intermittent with FASD, right? What we can do today, we can't do tomorrow, and so on. So we have to be flexible so that when you bump up against the limits a little earlier than you usually do, I'm here for you. But there has to be a way that we can communicate about that. The self-regulation pickle is that all the requirements for self-regulation belong in that part of the brain we know to be damaged by alcohol, right? What's the fix? How can we possibly make that claim? Here's the claim. Self-regulation requires executive functioning, and that's a known deficit. How can we expect self-regulation? The old answer, Dr. Claren, is the external brain. My challenge is to that is the external brain, yes, but what about the internal brain? What about the brain function that's still working? Why is this funny? Why is this cartoon funny? What makes it ironic? Oh, that part, yeah, dyslexic brain. But the question is posed, right? How else is it ironic? You have to have a brain in order to ask the question. If you can ask the question, then I expect that of you, right? So here's my new answer, with strong parts of the brain and the external support that Sterling Claren talks about, right? So a strong parts of the brain and external support. I'm not so much about external brain as I am about the compensating brain. This part of your brain will compensate for this part. And as we go region by region, we're going to get more into that. One of the problems with talking about self-regulation and saying, well, FASD isn't capable of that because of the executive function deficit is because of the hierarchy that we live in North America that says executive functioning is superior to all others. That frontal lobe, particularly left brain, is stronger than anything else. I've done this kind of as a quiz with high school students, and the left brain frontal lobe thinkers had higher marks. And I said to the rest of the class, which was well over 3/4, why do you think that is? And they said, well, because they're smarter than we are. And I said, no, it's because the system is set up for them. We teach to that part of the brain. I am here to overhaul that. I want to upset that hierarchy. And I think FASD is really doing that. Left frontal lobe thinking is considered superior to artistic thinking, right? Left brain over right brain. Science is more important than art, so let's cut all our art and music programs, that sort of thing. And definitely, executive functioning is more potent than survival thinking. Well, you take a business executive and put them in the forest, how long do you think they're going to live, right? That we're here to upset that hierarchy. FASD says that there is no one way that is superior in terms of self-regulation. Every part of the brain craves self-regulation. It just has its own way of doing it. And we need to capitalize on those parts. Neuroplasticity. Neuro means brain, plasticity means it's still shapeable. Dr. Bruce Perry says that the brain grows in a use-dependent way. Which I fully agree with, but I work with people whose disabilities are so severe, I can't expect them to use their brain, like some of them are nonverbal. And my addition to Dr. Perry's claim is that the brain grows in a reinforced dependent way. We can reinforce neurological brain connections in favor of them happening more. We're going to talk more about that. Reason number 3 is because thinking is how the brain heals itself. Now, this isn't a Jenny McCarthy how to heal autism thing. I'm not saying FASD can be healed, but I'm saying we can build neurological connections and really back out of people's lives so that they're able to live to the full extent of their potential, and then we support up to that. This is from Jessica's handbook. This is her depiction of self-regulation, really. This was her understanding of her brain coming out of rehab. What was amazing to me is that Jessica probably didn't know, and maybe we didn't even know, that she was prenatally exposed to alcohol. She was. And now looking, I didn't know then, this was many years ago, what I was seeing. But this was her first page. And she said, I am innocent. And I said, who's that? She said, that's my mom. And the first part of her handbook was all in black and white, and then it turned amazing color. I am innocent. And we didn't know she had FASD. And then her next page was, I am resilient. And this kid spinning around. It just gave me goosebumps. Yes, Jessica, you are resilient. You're amazingly resilient. And Brain Boxes is built on that foundation. Here's the foundation. Your whole brain is good. Even the parts that are prenatally affected, they make you, you. And I loved that. Brainbox principle, your strong parts will help your weaker parts. For all that's left over, that's what I'm here for. That's what we're here for. Self-regulation builds independence and quality of life. So, we've had 4 reasons for why to teach brain to kids. This is number 5 reason, because it works. I did this study with a kid, and it was just amazing. These are the behaviors: taking stuff, squirreling, lying, fighting, and skipping school. Baseline behavior is in blue. During the teaching of Brain Boxes, which is just a whole bunch of fun, we make a sculpture and we do poetry and we watch a couple of movies like The Matrix and things that have that metaphorical connection to brain function. Here's the severity of the behavior at the time. Administrative or legal consequences for stealing and lying and fighting. As we went down, there was still socially disruptive behaviors, but responsibility was taken, and I expect you to do that, right? I can either punish you, or we can fix it, right? And I am not a punisher, so let's fix it. How are we going to make this right? I've had kids who are nonverbal who have smoked me in the face, and their caregivers have said, oh, he needs to go into timeout, and I was like, wait a minute, he has a brain injury, what good is that going to do? I said, can he not fix it? And they said, well, how is he going to fix it? And I said, well, can you prompt him to touch me? Can you say, hey, you know, that hurt, Carmen? And we fixed, and I'm good. I'm like, you know what, don't take him to timeout. There's no point in it, and he just fixed it. So I'm all about that. Responsibility taken is a great reduction in behavior within normal range. The reason to teach brains to kids is because it works, and we set up environmental adaptations so that we set this kid up for success. We taught missing skills, because there were some skills that were missing that if they were in place, the behavior wouldn't be as necessary, including communication. If you need a sensory break, you don't need to act like a jerk in class, right? You just need to ask for it. Here's how. You know, maybe you just need to flip over a card on your desk, and then I just need to say to you, yep, go ahead, right? Off you go. That's great. That is so much better than hitting someone in the back of the head. So teaching those missing skills. Reinforcing in a meaningful way was also part of the strategy. And finally, having a reactive strategy that didn't reinforce the behavior. So often our reactive strategies do. They get something out of it, right? And then what have we done? We've made it more likely for the behavior to happen again. We need to evaluate our reactive strategies for their reinforcing power. We're going to look for the next half hour specifically at brainstem behaviors, and we've already been alluding to some of them, including hoarding, squirreling, intrusive errors, not telling the truth, inserting things that aren't there, promiscuity we mentioned as well. Those are some of our brainstem behaviors. We're going to get to those. But with each brain region, as we go along in the next 2 sessions, we're going to talk about the function, like the job description of a particular region. This is important because prenatal exposure to alcohol does regional damage, like it'll damage like a whole region. There's even times when that part isn't even there, agenesis, right? It's gone. Where there's big gaps in it, that's a regional, you can expect to see behavioral problems from whatever job belonged there. But there's also systemic problems. What happens when those regions communicate with each other and are meant to work well? Maybe parts of the frontal lobe are fine, but it's not communicating well with the emotional parts and the survival parts of the brain. We're going to look at the strength of that particular region, what it craves, what its motivation is, and the reward center, as we're going to talk about in a bit, lives back here, right there in the brainstem. The impact of alcohol, how it looks when that region is damaged, and finally what it looks like when it's on its best behavior. And that's what makes this a strength-based strategy. Streithsguth, instead of saying we need a wholesale external brain supports in place, says when we understand which parts are effective, then we can set up interventions that are tailored for that particular type of injury. That's what I'm interested in. If you got a strong part of your brain, boy, we are going to do projects, and I'm going to teach to that part, and I'm going to expect that of you, and we're going to celebrate it. And the rest is why I'm here. This was Jessica's colorful depiction of how her brain works. And what you can't see in a tactile way, or can't feel, is that these squares are Velcroed in place. They're wrapped with packing tape, and they're Velcroed, and she can actually lift them up. And I said, what is that for? And she said, well, it's like, that's how I look at my world. And she didn't have descriptions for how everything worked, but some of it was like vision, some of it was, I look at things emotionally, I look at things imaginatively, I look at things rationally. She didn't use those words, but that's what she was describing. Kids will come up with their own metaphors. This was Jessica's. So, there are many ways to divide the brain, just like an apple. We can split it down the middle and see how symmetrical it looks. We can slice it across halfway through and see that it's divided another way. Why do those divisions matter? They matter because we can locate the regions in different ways, and we can understand how they work together as systems. That's important. So today, we are going to divide the brain from front to back. Why does that matter to FASD? Because that's how the brain develops in utero, from front to back. Which means that if this was an unplanned pregnancy, and mom was a drinker who just didn't know that she was pregnant and drank throughout her pregnancy, this is the first part to start marinating in alcohol, right? From front to back. From the back, this is the old brain, or sometimes it's called the reptilian brain. My kids call it the jungle, because that's where the caveman lives. Here, let's do this. This is the brainstem, the jungle. And it's right here at the back of my head. Back here is just where that little bump is. What else do we have? Oh, this is the emotional center. You know when you have a Slurpee and then you freeze your soft palate, the emotional center is right behind that. So just have a Slurpee and you know where all your emotions live. And then that picture part of our brain is right back here. Right back here. My kids call that the movie theater because it's the color buttered popcorn. And then we have the temporal lobe, which is responsible for listening. And this is where intrusive errors happen, right? This is where we hear things that didn't actually happen when there's damage in this region right here behind our temples. And then there's, of course, well, you know what I mean. Here, left brain. This is important. This is math and language and science. And then there's the parietal lobe, which is response. This is like the GPS system for the brain, and that just goes right over here. And then there's, of course, the right side, which is all responsible for art and drama. So that's how I teach brain locations to kids, that and a whole bunch of other ways. And so next time, I'm going to bring a bunch of those things, and you'll have ideas of your own for how to teach brain regions to children. You'll tell me if I still have stuff in my hair, right? Okay, here's our divisions. The old brain, right at the back. The freezer brain part where our emotions live, and the neocortex, or the newest brain, which is up on top. This is where the caveman lives, and it was amazing when I taught this. It was my first lesson on brain boxes. We did a great big art project. We talked about the jungle and about all the behaviors that belong there, and no sooner did we do this, two kids were working up at the board and they started to jostle, and they just like this, and they were slamming at each other, and someone from the back of the room said, Get out of your brainstem, Matthew. And just knew exactly where that behavior originated. He was feeling threatened, and they started to scrap. Just within, one art class, and that was happening. He understood what his caveman was. Here's the freezer brain part where our emotions live, and the newest brain. This is her brain. He says, is she threatening me? Right? That's his ultimate reaction. Brainstem. Its main function is survival. So you look at all the behaviors involved in survival. What do we need to do to survive? What do we need to do to survive? Throw some out. Eat. Shelter. Breathe. Sleep. Our heart rate, yeah, the automatic parts, right? Anything that keeps the species going? Procreate. Now, look at that list. Sleep, eat, breathe, procreate. Think about how good those feel, right? Every one of those floods our bodies with these pleasurable chemicals. And that's what the hindbrain does, the brainstem does, in order to inspire more behavior of that kind. Berries, when I look at like stir fry, and it's all these bright, bright colors, and I think, isn't it amazing how Mother Nature rewards us with what we're supposed to eat? Doritos is a false orange. That's not real orange, it's food coloring. And there's a reason why tree bark looks the way it does, because there's no nutritive value to that. And the caveman would have, I'm not gonna eat tree bark, but I am gonna eat berries. So the brain rewards us with these chemicals that keeps us doing pleasurable things. When there is deficiency in that area, we might not know when to stop. Because it's a defect, or everything else hurts so bad. Nothing else feels good. I'm so depressed. I'm living with the secondary disabilities that this one thing does produce comfort, and I'm going to keep doing it. I had a girl say to me, we're going to get more into this next session when we talk about sensory, but she said, I really wish that I could feel this good without having so much sex. And I said, well, what kind of sex are you having? And she said, well, lots. And I looked at her boyfriends. She was a petite girl. She was really tiny. And always had big, burly boyfriends. And I said, like, what is that about? And she said, it feels so good when they lay on me. And I said, you know what? We need to get you a weighted blanket because you don't need to be having this much sex. But she said she had sex for sensory reasons and not for reasons of love and affection and devotion, right? So when that part is out of whack, we might pursue behaviors that just allow us to feel good. And obviously, there's some addiction that lives in this region as well. The strength is reflexive movement. We had a kid come into our program one time, and he had such an awful rap sheet with him that one of the only things we could find that he was good at was climbing. And so the first day we had him, we said, we're going to the rock wall. And he was awesome, right? And he made friends that day because they were like, wow, he is the best climber we've ever seen. And his reflex of his survival movement, he was just an amazing athlete. Very good at procedural memory, right? So when you go into a workplace, do not set me in a boardroom because I'm not going to learn how to do my job. I need hands-on to remember. Making survival decisions is another strength. Their motivation is equilibrium or status quo. The motivation is just to regulate. This is the regulatory center of the brain. The impact of alcohol is the things we just described, either impulsivity, just going after those things without the regulatory function of the higher brain, and reward dysfunction, pursuing rewards that, in a damaging or in an ineffective way. Self-regulated, this part of the brain is attentive, responsive, it's satisfied, and you know what else it is? It's loyal. Just think of like caveman clan behavior, that deeply devoted. There was a time when this part of the brain region and its functions were prized by the community because these people were brave and these people would go over the mountain that nobody else went over in search of better land. These people were courageous and found new sources of food. But in our concrete Rubbermaid world, these skills aren't as valued as they once were. So these are some of the brainstem behaviors that we can see. If you have questions, please jump in or save them and we'll ask at 10:30. this list is so important to carry with us when we advocate for our clients in other places, because so often they've already adopted all of these nicknames. Our culture has names for FASD behaviors. And we're going to come up with some strategies around these right at the end. Anything there that jumps out at you that you have? Can we take comments? Can we do that or not? Yeah. Stories? Questions or comments? This is a big one, isn't it? To make that judgment that these behaviors are the result of poor parenting and not brain-based behavior. I think that's pretty important. And look how we can capitalize on things like a keen sense of justice, right? We had a little guy, we called him the little sheriff, because he was so aware of the rules and always kept things in line. But out on the playground, it's called being a tattletale. So we created my job, your job, so that when he was saying, teacher, he's doing, we could say, whose job is that? It's your job. So that we could liberate him, we could free him to be the child that he actually is. But that's a strong thing. And how can we foster that into a vocation? You have a keen sense of justice? You want to be a security guard? Do you want to be the founder of an advocacy group? How can we get you involved so that you can say, this is a matter of justice? We can turn these strengths into jobs. I'm going to carry on. The reward center. There's a whole lot involved. Anatomy is involved, where in the brain this actually lives. Motivation, which can be both external and internal. The chemistry and the electricity. This is the anatomy. It's the freezer brain part together with the jungle. It's the emotional center as well as the survival behaviors, where all of those juicy reward chemicals are generated. Motivation can be internal and external. When the chemistry is right, we just do it because it feels good. But other times, if that part is deficient, we need external rewards, and that's a hard bit to convince people on. I had a teacher say to me that, of course, the rewards of learning are inherent, or whatever. And I said, and how exactly is he going to pick up on that, on the inherent rewards of learning? And then she said, well, like the look on my face. Like, I have pleasure when my students are learning. And, okay, let's talk about face blindness, or the fact that he's looking everywhere but your face. And he's not motivated by your tone of voice, or that all the other students are enjoying themselves learning fractions. So there might not be an inherent reward for him. It might be really, really hard to learn for him, and it might not be fun at all. So we need some external motivators until those paths are built in the brain. Sometimes we're motivated by what we want. We want better grades, we want a job promotion, we want to live on our own, we do not want to go back to the group home. So we're motivated by what we want. And other times we're motivated by what we don't want. And often we capitalize on that in punishing systems. Like, I'm motivated by the fact that I don't want to be in timeout again. And year after year, as I see these people sitting in timeout, year after year, as I see adults sitting in jail, and I think, well, they're clearly not motivated by your punishment. So how's that working for you? Like, we have to find a different way. They're not motivated by by what they don't want or what is aversive, excuse me. I had a kid, I'm always on the lookout for what people want, because it can become the source of motivation. And I was working with a young man. He had all kinds of attitude. I was at his workplace, and I asked him, just to get a sense of what made him tick, and what are you passionate about, what are you, nothing. I just don't want anything to do with you. I just want to get this stupid job over with. But he was wearing a shirt that said, I'd rather be fishing. So I looked at him, I said, hey, you just wearing that shirt for fun, or does it mean something? Oh no, he said, I love fishing. Okay, I just found a motivation. All right, let's do something. No, maybe we won't go fishing today, but we can work towards something, or we can build, it'll be a source of conversation. So there's always clues about, a kid says, hey, can I wear my ball class, my ball cap in class, it's a want. And we can say, let's build that into our plan for the day. How much math do you think you can get done? And then you can wear your ball cap. All around us, we're motivated by things. We need to be paying attention to it. The chemistry is so important when it comes to motivation. When I was working with David in the horse stalls, I didn't generate any chemistry in him, any pleasurable chemistry until we played, right? Until he flicked horse crap at me. Then all of a sudden, the chemistry changed because it went from threat, like I dare you to make me stay here all morning, to something that was fun. His body may have been flooded with serotonin that just said, hey, I can trust this person. I can have fun for the next couple of hours. His body may have been flooded with dopamine that said, I want to keep doing this. How long? I don't know, 2 o'clock, right? I'll skip lunch because I'm motivated to do this. Adrenaline, neuroepinephrine, which is paying attention, right? All of a sudden he was attending his task. The other thing we did was I moved over to the next stall and I said, let's see who can finish first. And we started leapfrogging each other, and it became a game. He jumped over me, and I jumped over him, stall by stall by stall, and it was a competition, which also produced energy and chemistry. Electricity is also important when it comes to a brain affected by an FASD. Do I have these written down? Yes. These nice Greek words, hey? B, just think of busy bee. That's the busiest, most active you can be. Alpha, just think of attention. Not quite busy, but paying attention. Most of your brains right now will probably be in alpha, in an alpha range of electrical conduction. Theta, think of television. This is just one notch above sleep, one notch below being actively engaged. T for television. And delta is dreaming, your dream state. What we find in people prenatally exposed to alcohol is that their alpha range is very low, particularly in some regions more than others. So paying attention is really hard. They are either bouncing off the walls or just kind of hovering above sleep, like, yoo-hoo, you paying attention? Delta is also impacted, the dream wave state. So there's not a whole lot of good quality sleep happening. They're kind of hovering above that. And then they show up for school and they've got high beta. They're putting out lots and lots of energy and having a hard time paying attention, and they're exhausted, right? Because they're not sleeping. And they're not learning because it's hard to pay attention if I can't have my hands in everything. So that's also very important when it comes to motivation, having a reinforcer that is actually motivating. We're going to move on to behavior and threat, which also lives in this part of the brain. I want to say something about reward here for a second. We're going to get to more of this, but you know, I often think of my clients as dolphins, that they're constantly putting out signals and they want feedback. Where am I? Where am I in time? On the plane on the way here, the pilot came over the intercom and said, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and whatever, have a good, and then he paused and he said, have a good morning. And because of the shift work, I think he didn't know where, like, is it morning or afternoon or evening or what, where am I? And often kids don't know that, and we take that for granted. We say, okay, boys and girls, it's Friday, and you know what that means. What does Friday mean? Oh, crap. You know, and it means it's assembly. I should line up, and there's a whole behavioral sequence that follows from that one key. I don't know where I am. Or the child who gets up and wanders around the class, and we're like, do you even know where you are? Honestly, no, I don't. I do now, but I didn't 5 minutes. They're like dolphins sending out these signals. Or the child who bounces into everybody on the way to recess and like, Josh hit me again. No, Josh didn't hit you. Josh is a dolphin, and he's putting out signals so that he knows where you stop and he starts. And this is the child who comes up to your desk and bumps into it every single time and spills your coffee because he doesn't know that he's arrived until he's bumped into something, right? It's a signal. And my point is that one of the most potent reinforcers that we can provide is feedback. Just feedback ahead of the behaviors that create problems. Feedback after a project. You know what, I really like what you did here. I really like the color that you chose for this art. I love the way you solved that math problem. Whatever. Feedback about who they are, how they behaved, and what they're capable of it doesn't all have to be gummy bears. Reinforcement can just be meaningful feedback. Okay, that's my rant. So, threat also belongs to this part of the brain. And going back to David in the stall, you know, people will say, well, we have an excellent bully prevention program in your school. Yeah, you do. But you know what? Maybe you're a threat. Maybe your reward chart that he knows he will never qualify for is threatening to him and produces the same chemicals as a bully on the playground. That's threatening. Or the promotion, the job promotion. I am never going to get it. How am I ever going to get off this assembly line? I'll never qualify. Why? Because I'm bad at this and I'm bad at that, and the boss is looking at me and nobody likes me around here, and they're talking trash to the supervisor, and I'm never going to, and it's threatening. And it produces all of the chemicals as if, you know, there was a monster under your bed or a bear in the forest. Same chemistry that says, I got to get out of here. I got to run, or I got to fight. So threat is an interesting, what is threatening here? It's not just bullies. And frankly, when it comes to changing the aggressive behavior of people with an FASD, I think we need to start with the culture. Because we may have a bully prevention program, but we don't have a peace program. I look at the interventions provided to my clients who are working so hard to regulate their emotions and to control their reflexive behaviors. And when 25 other students know that that's a really easy button to push, just to have a good time, just because English is boring, they'll push that button. And the culture fosters aggression and violence, and it feeds off of it. It's reality TV right there in the workplace or the classroom or the home. Siblings do the same thing sometimes. So, threat is an interesting thing to study. Who does this? Downshifting. Leslie Hart. Leslie Hart calls it downshifting. Eric Jensen calls it survivalizing, that they go into survival mode. A threat is perceived. Remember, perception produces the same responses in actuality. It doesn't have to be, you don't believe me? There are some people who say, well, that's not possible. Really, lock your doors, snuggle into bed, get really cozy and safe. There's nothing that's going to hurt you. Now fantasize about a burglary. And, you know, we've done that, right? You fantasize about something and your heart starts to pound and you sweat, and nothing has changed in your environment. You changed your physiology through thought. The same is true about the thoughts of people with an FASD. The thought is, wow, Kyle gave me a dirty look. That's just the thought. When it downshifts, it goes into, well, he's a real jerk, and I don't think I ever want to play with it. He makes me really mad. And then it downshifts one more time into a reaction. I'm going to go over there and pop him in the nose, right? That's a downshift. Our job in that downshifting process is to reduce threat in the first place. That's an environmental adaptation. So I don't care about bully prevention. I care about a peace project. I care about a culture of peace. I had kids who used to come to my house who knew that I didn't allow play guns on my property, and literally, we didn't have a fence. We just had property lines. And one time I looked out the kitchen window and there were guns laying on the property line because they knew my house was a house of peace. So I don't care about bully prevention in the schools. Our classrooms, our homes, our family culture, our communities need to be places of peace in order to support this, to reduce threat ahead of time. Our job is not to argue the perception, because that can just take the threat further. I perceived it. I'm not going to argue with you on that, but there are other ways of talking through it. Call upon strong self-regulation skills that are already there. If the strength in the skill is in pictures, say, hey, what is it going to look like when we go on this field trip? What's that going to look like? Rather than, the rules of the field trip are, we're going to say, what's it going to look like? Because that's a strength. It's a picture. I've done that. I've looked in my rearview mirror and I said, hey guys, what was this going to look like? And you adjust the pictures instead of me being the law enforcer. adjust the pictures. That's a strength. Call upon the skills that are there. Moving down to the feeling response in the downshift, the body is now involved. The brain has equipped the body to respond reflexively. That's when the adrenaline is there and all of the chemistry is in place to really fight or flee. Our job is to notice those body changes. Teamwork is so important. Teamwork's between mums and dads and mums and grandmas and service providers and classroom teachers and EAs is so important to look at the bodily changes that happen when someone starts, that's nonviolent crisis intervention, isn't it? Salvage any self-regulation that is there, but do not call upon underdeveloped skills. I see this with people with autism sometimes where they go into meltdown mode and then somebody pulls out pecs, right? The pictures, and they're like, ooh, do you want this? Is this what you want? And I'm like, has that ever been taught to him before? No. Well, then you ought not be using it now because it's not a skill yet. And the same is true of other things like, well, you can go use the sensory room. You can go to the calming room now. You're excused. Have they used the sensory room for fun? Or are they going to just perceive this as another timeout? Don't call upon unintroduced or underdeveloped skills. Now, when we downshift completely, we're nearing a meltdown. The body is now acting on reflex. There will be limited self-awareness. You don't believe this? This is the physiology of threat. When children are in an unthreatening environment, people are in an unthreatening environment, our eyes can focus straight forward and we can read. We can go like this, we can read, we can track on the page. When a threat is perceived, there is a microscopic movement to the outside and we become more perceptive of threat. And it is physiologically difficult, if not impossible, to read. Read your book! But I'm feeling threatened. I can't. So, the body is now acting on reflex. Limited self-awareness, right? I can't climb above myself and observe my behavior because that's not what my body is equipped to do right now. Our job to react to crisis is safe, rapid, socially valid control of the crisis. And that's it. Crisis is not a time to teach. All your teaching needs to happen before this. When we're in crisis mode, we intervene so that we get safe, rapid control in a socially valid way. Socially valid? I have a teacher once told me, she said, I just discovered a new way how to get Jason to put his boots on because he's so slow at recess. And Jason has FASD. And I said, well, really, what did you discover? And she said, I just told him somebody's going to steal them. And it's not, I mean, on a scale of 1 to jail, that's not bad in terms of aversive strategies, but it's behavior motivated by fear, and I'm not in favor of that, right? Safe, rapid, socially valid control of the situation. I'm going to finish up here by doing a little exercise. This is about our reflexive brain abilities, okay? What I want you to do in your own head is just go left to right, row by row, saying the colors to yourself. Reflexive brain. Go. You just decoded these colors using the reflexive part of your brain. When you were learning this in kindergarten, your frontal lobe would have been red hot because I gotta look, is that blue or is that yellow, right? Just smoking hot. But you got good at it, and in order to free up that space in your frontal lobe, the job divided up the task and sent it backwards to your reflexive part deep into the jungle, so you just know, hey, that's pink. And you can do it more reflexively so that this space is available for more learning. Automatic reflexive behaviors are really hard to override. Do you want to try? What I would like for you to do is to say to yourself the font color. Go. How'd you do? It's slow, yeah, and hard. How did you get through it? Slowed down, paid more attention. Good. Anything else? Correction when you make mistakes. Cool. One of the things I try and do is just look at like the first part of, like just look at the line and not look at the whole word. So what we've done is we've come up with strategies, right, in order to override the reflex. Our reflexive brain has the responsibility of naming the font color, but our higher functioning brain, the executive function part of the brain, knows what words are. Language lives in the left frontal lobe. So our left brain, which has all kinds of power, wants to do that part. So we have to override that system. How is that analogous to behavior? Overriding reflexive behaviors with conscious thought. It doesn't always have to be frontal lobe. Maybe we override conscious behaviors with pictures, with our imaginative part. Or maybe we can override it with, you know, where our sense of virtue and character live in the emotional part. We can override those reflexes with that. You know what, Kyle's pretty important to me. Maybe his dirty look meant something else, right? That whole thing. Out in the playground, Kyle gave me a dirty look. So this is what a support plan looks like. We are going to get into this in detail and come up with some crazy fun stuff in the third session. But this is just a preview of the kind of behavior support plans that I set up. My behavior support plans always have 4 parts. These are those 4 parts. And this is a behavior support plan for supporting brainstem dysfunction, brainstem emotional dysfunction. Adaptations to the environment. These are the ecological strategies that everybody who's writing about FASD talks about. We need to adapt the environment. Our cognitive disability strategy in Saskatchewan just approved funding for a group home to install locks and safes in their building. We've never done that before. It's always been for like wheelchairs and, you know, weighted blankets and stuff. And I was so pleased because it meant they understood that taking things and hoarding things was a behavior product of a disability. And yeah, this is a strategy. The strategy is we have locked doors, or a locked door. I think it was where the caregivers, where their quarters were. I was so pleased with that. It's an environmental adaptation. Strategic reduction of threat, whatever that is. Even your reinforcement schedule might be threatening. Asking questions. Instead of saying, get to class, we say, where are you supposed to be right now? It's just a little bit of practice for the self-regulating brain. Safe adventure is so important. These kids are, adults too, are driven by novelty. We can't shut down our skate parks. We can't shut down our rock walls and our swimming nights. We need to keep safe adventure in order to continue to feed that part of the brain. Be generous with non-contingent rewards. What I mean by that is sometimes I'll do a reinforcement inventory, which is a really neat thing, of all the stuff that makes a person tick, what they love, what they're passionate about, what they're willing to work for. And so, you know what the temptation is? Oh, now that I know that, I have something to take away, right? And it becomes a source of punishment. Or, I know what you want, and I'm going to make you work for everything. Instead of saying, okay guys, everybody can wear their ball caps today, yay! You haven't earned it. It's not because it has to do with fractions. It's because it's Friday and everybody's going to wear ball caps and chew gum. So we need more non-contingent rewards so that stuff is fun, so that workplaces and classrooms and homes are fun. Nutrition and exercise is important because that's just a basic need of that part of the brain. One of my beliefs in setting up support plans is that all behavior is purposeful. It's functional. It has a function. What is gained from doing this behavior? And if you could, the need is always valid. The need is valid. If you need sensory input, if you need a heavy dude on top of you, that need is valid. But the method for getting that need met isn't safe, or it isn't working, or it isn't right, or it's illegal, or whatever. The need is valid. I'm hearing you, but we have to find better ways, and that's what teaching these skills is about. Teaching methods for getting that need met in ways that are socially acceptable and healthier for you. Like I said, I'm going to get into this in detail as we go lobe by lobe, so I won't go into all of it. Teaching related communication. I often have people say to me, well, he is just so non-compliant. And I say, what did you ask him to do? Well, I asked him to do this, and he just like walks off the job. I just find him in the staff room, like he's so non-compliant. We can't have him here anymore. And I said, does he understand what you're asking of him? Well, I don't always think so, but he knows. And look, if he doesn't understand what you're asking, that's a communication problem, not a non-compliance problem. We need to define the behavior properly. It's not non-compliance, it's miscommunication. And we need to find a strategy that works. And you'll be amazed at how the job gets done. The reward system. We need to stop punishing unwanted behavior and start rewarding the absence of the behavior, or even a reduction in the behavior. It took you 14 minutes to fight on the playground. Yay, that was better than yesterday. We need to reinforce the absence or the improvement of the behavior, and I have some fun strategies for how to do that. Like I said, do regular reinforcement inventories. They change. My motivations change. I'm not motivated by the same thing this week that I was last week. And so people say, well, we did that for a while, but it stopped working. Yeah, it did. Last week I was motivated by scrapbooking. This week I'm not, right? This week I was motivated by this, right? This is what made me tick. So we need to do reinforcement inventories to find out what people are inspired by. Again, use the least amount of support needed for mastery, decreasing this overlap. And finally, responding in a way that does not reinforce the behavior that was used to get that need met. It's just safe, rapid control of the crisis in a socially valid way. We're going to open this up to questions here. This is what session 2 is going to be about. Today we talked about emotional and survival behavior. Next time we're going to talk about these other 4 lobes. And then in session 3, we're going to talk about that 4-part behavior strategy for each of those parts, making the ecological changes, really fun reinforcement strategies that are unbelievably effective, teaching those missing skills, and restoring order in non-aversive, non-punitive ways. So we're going to open it up for questions at this time, but I don't know if I'll have a chance to say thank you at the end, so I'm going to say that now. Thank you so much for inviting me to continue this conversation here today, and I hope our paths cross in a face-to-face way sometime soon. Thank you.
I have a child that my motivation with him was to, at the end of the week, and his behavior was good for getting up and getting ready for school. He would earn an MP3 player. The minute he got it, he just reverted right back to old behaviors. And do you have any skills or any advice as to how to keep them motivated?
It happens so commonly. The question is, what happens when we have an expected behavior that's followed by the reinforcement, and then as soon as the reinforcement is delivered, the behavior happens? My hunch is that maybe the reinforcement schedule wasn't set up in a way that worked with his timing. Here's what I mean. Maybe before, the hope often is immediate compliance, right? We want you to get ready, period. Sometimes we need to set up reinforcement schedules first that improve the behavior so that you get ready faster or more independently, whatever the goals happen to be, and that is reinforced. And then we continue to support the rest. And so there's gradual improvements until the point where the skills are there, the communication is there, the habits are there, I know how to do this, and then we say, get dressed, here's your MP3 player. And then there's no need for the behaviors because it's all done. We've learned it that way. But I would also ask questions about, how is it being communicated? Is it a sequencing problem? Is there problems understanding the whole, left brain, right brain is partial picture, whole picture stuff. These are the steps of getting ready, but what does it look like when I'm ready as a whole? So those would be some questions I would ask.
And we didn't have them long enough to follow through, so sometimes that's an issue too.
Well,
He wasn't quickly out of our home, so I just don't know where the rewards were. It's like you said, you don't want to create too much too much manipulation for rewards. You don't want to create. You want to create the self-pride as well.
Yes. Yeah, but sometimes we need those external rewards just to get a feel for it, right? Just to create a new habit. And built into that overlap, you know, as we decrease our prompting, we also need to decrease our reinforcing, right? Once the behavior does start to improve, we don't want to create reward dependency. So there needs to be a fading plan. And one of the ways we do that is we expect this behavior for, like in 1 hour, we expect this, and then reinforcement is delivered. And now we expect the behavior for an hour and 15 minutes, and then reinforcement is, there's different ways of doing that.
I guess that was the better question would be, how do I deal with children that are already reward dependent? Because we get a lot of institutionalized children that are coming and going.
Oh,
We're
true.
trying to help develop their skills and not just, use reward only.
The question is, what do we do with reward-dependent children, especially if they're shuffled from home to home and they're already so used to like only working for the treat? I went to West Edmonton Mall yesterday and I was amazed at how many things were willing to work. Like I saw the sea lion thing and they're working for fish, and I thought, wow, I wonder if that sea lion would do that not like for something other than the fish. But it's like the t-shirt, I'd rather be fishing. We need to look for motivators other than that thing that they're already saturated with. Like, is he motivated by a car ride with you? And find out what really makes him happy and sort of wean him off of other kinds of rewards that he's used to. Yeah, well, where's my gum? Well, you're not getting gum, but we're going to do something else that's fun.
That's true, because they get used to the same reward, so they become they know how to use that after a while. Yeah.
I just want to make a comment, because you're in that system, about inheriting. When we inherit kids into our programs, when they are passed from one to another, we're also inheriting their behavior strategies, the strategies that were used in their last setting. And if they are to be employed in the new setting, they need a thorough protocol. We need to know how to deliver that, because it can be so terribly manipulated, and it can also do damage. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Okay, I'd like to go to Lethbridge now. Lethbridge Family Services. Is there any questions from you guys?
Aaron, we don't have any, thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Hazel. How about Calgary?
We don't have any questions either, Aaron.
Okay, thanks. Let's go to Lakeland Center.
We don't have any questions either, thank you.
Alright. How about Camrose? I know your facilitator wasn't able to come today in Camrose, so if anyone is okay with unmuting the mics, you can just let me know if you either have questions or don't have questions.
Hi there, I do have a question.
Okay.
This is from Keaton Halls. So my question is, you were talking about a keen sense of justice and working with that person to become an advocate or something where they're working with the justice system part of thing. What happens when they take it so far, and how are we setting up an external brain so they don't go to the extreme of finding justice, for example?
And what would be an example of an extreme of finding justice? I think I know where you're going, but help me.
When do we say that this is the way it is and there's going to be problems changing this, let it go, don't ruminate over it? How can we distract them so they're not working themselves to death over this, or just keep going and they don't stop?
I mean, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? It's a wonderful problem to have, to be that passionate about something that you can't stop thinking about it. Those are the makings of great leaders. And when I say become involved in justice, I mean like being part of an action group, say, where you're speaking on behalf of other people, and you're passionate about the justice and the fairness of their services or their life situation. That's what I meant by becoming involved in justice, not necessarily vigilante justice or even with the justice system. They have a keen sense of defending something that's right, what's right and wrong, and we're going to defend this. As far as taking that action too far, I think the environment needs to be set up so that they know what is the job of people with higher authority. They might need a visual of the hierarchy. It is not your job to take it that far. And here are the steps that you can take to deliver it into the hands of the people who are in a position to do that. Whether that's the police, or I'm not quite sure what you're thinking, or the classroom teacher, or the mom, that part isn't your job. I had a parent, for example, whose other children were often responsible of monitoring the behavior of her child with FASD, and she said, I can't keep them from tattling, like that's all they do. And I said, well, what do you respond when they do tattle? And she says, well, I go deal with the problem. Well, you've reinforced it. You've told them that's their job because you've acted on their job. So for a person who takes that too far, which happens a lot in classrooms and families, perseverating on something, this is right and this is wrong, we can set up the environment so that they know the hierarchy of where the limits of their job are. Again, the missing skills. What skills do they need to settle back down and to say, this is outside my control and I can't completely make this right today. And also reinforcing, again, those actions that are admirable and safe and appropriate, and saying, yay, you did your job, great, thank you for meeting that expectation and not exceeding it. Does that answer your question?
It certainly does, and certainly I wasn't going for the justice as in the legal part, but for example, my client is she's a mom with 2 children and in relationships right now, and has stated that she has relationships like her 13-year-old daughter, where she's making mistakes. She can see what her daughter's making, but she is at the state too where she's thinking, why are these men why are they like this? How and why and why? And that's her whole question. Why? And so it's more about saying like she knows that's wrong. For her it's wrong, but I just can't get her to think about something else, or to divulge deeper into the problem, because she's certainly not she's low enough functioning that she doesn't have the wording for that, or the pictures, like how do you find this to set it up where she can express herself.
I'm just processing what you're saying. We all heard her questions. So the client is actually the mom. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
And she's the one who's kind of stuck on this idea of right and wrong.
Correct.
Gotcha. Well, again, the environment can be set up to support her job as a mother. And there's really two problems that are going on. There's the right and wrong behavior of the daughter, and there's even the unhealthy behavior of the mom. And how are we going to set that up so that she can do her job best? What skills is she missing? I forget who talked about approximations, but an approximation is knowing what the brain is doing internally, and because that system is faulty, we need to do it outside ourselves. And I could go off on a huge rant with this, but one of the most amazing things that I think we're missing in our Western culture is ritual. And ritual is such a powerful way of letting go. And that's the opposite of perseveration, right? She's hung up on what's right and wrong. How do I let this go? How do I keep letting this go? And what sort of ritual is going to allow me to bury this, to set it free? I was with a woman one time in her living room in an apartment, and she had a strong sense of guilt. This is a strong sense of justice. She had a strong sense of guilt, and she had feathers in a bowl, and I asked if we could take one. We went out onto the balcony, and we blew it, and it was just a symbolic ritual. There wasn't a lot of words, but we just set the guilt free. Not forever, because it came back, but for that moment. And maybe the mom needs a ritual that says, I need to let go of what my daughter is doing. I know it's wrong. And how to ritualize that in a way that's cathartic for her or transforming for her.
Excellent. That's excellent ideas. Thank you. We're working on deep breathing already, and that seems to really help. But again, the support isn't there in the home. She's pretty much independent with maybe 2 hours of support a week kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing her quite a bit, but we are working on the deep breathing. So
Thank you. I'll go further with that, with the symbolic part, and see how that goes as well.
Thank you. I would look forward to hearing how that turns out for you. People become
Oh,
very
me too.
creative when they start thinking about rituals, so thank you.
I want to move
Yeah,
on.
thanks.
Thanks for your question. I just want to move on now to the schools that are in this session. Do you
Oh,
guys
I
have
talked
any-
so much about teachers, didn't I? I'm sorry.
So schools, Medicine Hat, Boyan, Tabor. Just make sure you come off mute if you're wanting to ask a question.
Medicine Hat, we have no questions.
Okay, thanks.
This is Oyen. No question, but thanks a lot for the presentation.
Thank you.
This is Tabor. We also have no questions, but thank you very much for your presentation.
They're all mad at me.
So we'll just open it up now for all the other locations. If you have any questions.
I have a quick question.
Oh, we have a question in the room. Sorry, hold on. There's a question in the room.
Thanks. I'm just have a question around diagnosis for FASD. With the clients that you work with, like, are all of the clients diagnosed prior when they come to you, or what percentage would you say do you get diagnosed, and do you start to implement some of these strategies even before with just a suspicion of FASD?
Okay. The question is, what is the percentage of people I serve who have a diagnosis? Is it required to come into my program? And do I implement strategies before even knowing the diagnosis? The answer to the last question is yes.
Okay.
I do implement strategies ahead of time. I have probably the majority of my clients right now are in the process of being diagnosed. They're just in that whole medical workup thing. And then there's a portion where there's the suspicions, and we're just working at building trust and what would be the benefits of a diagnosis, is it necessary, that kind of thing. But all of the signs and the history is there. And yes, definitely, we set up strategies. And I don't call them FASD strategies, not for anybody, because of course there can be debate about whether or not. But I'm just really devoted to utilizing all of the good information that's out there and delivering FASD specific strategies and not always borrowing from autism and other disabilities. Thanks.
All right, so we'll go to, I think it was Wainwright that had a question.
Hi.
Hi.
I just have a question on the sense of motivation. He's in grade 12 at the moment, and we're getting ready to transition into work experience to the school into work. But he has no sense of, getting a job and even wanting to do this. There's no sense of work. Even at home, if I say, I got a job for you to do, he stands there looking at me like a deer in the headlights. You know, how do you get this sense of I gotta get this job done?
Well, I'd be curious to know what the expectation, like what a picture of a job looks like for his service providers. Like, what are we expecting for his work? What does that mean? Do you want to answer that? What kind
Well,
of...
they're looking at placing him in things like grocery stores and things like that, because he's very OCD. So you get him to put something on the shelf, everything's straight. One of his strengths, you see. But for him to internalize even going and doing that job, I don't think they are, like you say, saying what this looks like. Like yesterday, I had him put the backing back on the shelf unit. It's just a wooden thing, and you put nails in.
Yeah.
Good job. It was done well.
Did he have fun?
I don't know if they are setting it up so he knows what this job looks like or not.
Can
Maybe
you...
that's what I have to find out.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you influence that? Can you guide whoever is helping him with those kinds of helpful questions?
Well, now we have a situation of they don't buy into the guy's disability. The guy's cute guy doesn't look like he has a disability. So there's an have.
Yes.
You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? They don't look like they have a disability, so he doesn't have a disability. The guy in the wheelchair, they're setting him up pretty good.
Yes.
They can see that. But the guy that doesn't have the face or anything, but has everything else, we're having a trouble. We're having a lot of trouble here.
Right. Now, if we could support our clients in becoming their own advocate, and he shows up for work with his own passion, and as you're saying, motivation is hard to find right now, but let's say he shows up knowing what he's good at, what makes the day go quickly, and what he needs to get by, then you don't have to be there and he can do that himself. As far as finding motivation for work, I mean, job testing would be great so that, you know, the day that he says, holy cow, where did the time go? That's the job. Because, you know, he had fun and wasn't concerned about the clock and getting through it and I just want out of here kind of stuff. And then maybe delivering to his employer a list of strengths and struggles and suggestions for how best to support that struggle. People are compassionate with or without a disability, I think, with the right presentation. And some will be more willing than others to make those adaptations. Is that helpful?
Is there any other questions either from?
Yeah. I have a little girl that has some severe food allergies, so obviously food is an issue. She is capable, if we were going someplace where there's lots of food, if you were to say, what can you eat? She can say, well, I can eat that and I can eat that. So, you know, when we set her up that way, it works well. So we don't typically have problems when we're out and about, but at home, in the evening, like in the middle of the night, actually not the evening, when she's standing up in the night and wandering and getting into the cupboards and raiding them and going absolutely nuts because nobody's hearing her now. In the past, we have a big sign on the cupboard, great big bright colorful sign that says the kitchen is closed at 8 o'clock because she goes to bed at 7. So we're pretty safe at 8 o'clock.
Nice.
And she gets that. The kitchen is closed at 8 o'clock. And that worked really well for a month. And then it quit working. You know, and we are reinforcing all the time. You didn't get up, you didn't get into the cupboards, that's fantastic. And then it quit working. So we had locks on the cupboards. So then if we lock the cupboard so she gets up and she wanders, she can't get into the cupboard, is that still teaching her, like, is that the right direction, or should we be teaching, how do we teach her that getting up in the night, helping herself to the cupboard and eating things that are going to make her sick is not okay?
Here's the question. There is a little girl who is, she has lots of food allergies, so it's important from a medical standpoint that she not eat absolutely everything, but she gets up in the middle of the night and she raids the cupboards. So an environmental strategy was to put this big yellow sign, the kitchen is closed at 8 o'clock, she goes to bed at 7. And so that worked for a while, but it stopped working. And then there's lots of reinforcement for when she doesn't get up. My question would be, how is that reinforcement delivered? Is it even, you know, we say, oh, I reinforced her, but if it's not reinforcing for them, it's not a reinforcer. We call it that, like I praised, or he had stickers, or he got gummy bears, but if it's not something she's identified as what's motivating, then it probably isn't reinforcing. The other question would be, is that reinforcement visual? Is that reinforcement realistic in terms of what we're expecting? If it's high rate behavior, we work to reduce the rate of the behavior before we eliminate it completely. So it's actually 2 back-to-back behavior strategies. One is to reduce it, and one is to eliminate it. And if you take a reading of how often the behavior is happening, that's the frequency, and a reading of how intense the behavior is, like to what extent is she willing to go, how much is she taking, is she putting herself at risk with what she's eating, then we can set up expectations where we might reduce the frequency of the behavior, but the intensity might go up for a little while. Like she doesn't raid the fridge as often, but when she does, it's a doozy. And then we would work at reducing the intensity. So it's actually back-to-back behavior plans. Do strategies expire? You bet. So the big yellow sign isn't working for her anymore, and there needs to be something new in her environment that says, oh yeah, this is still wrong. Those would be the kind of adaptations that I would make, and the delivery of the reinforcement would be really important. And to keep it fresh, keep it as fresh as apples, so that
So then the
she's
problem
motivated.
too is we're all asleep.
Yes.
So it's a really hard time because she's so freaking quiet, like so quiet. And even, you know, we had the child lock on at first, right? And I can't undo it without making a sound, but she can. So in order to correct or to reduce or whatever, do we need something that says, oh, she's in that kitchen to deal with it as it's happening? Like, do we need to put a motion sensor so that we know, so that we can redirect her back to bed? Or do we, if it's happened, or if it hasn't happened, then we're reinforcing?
And that reminds me of your last question too. The question is, if we install, you know, child locks and child alarms, you know, is that too much? Or if you said if we put locks on the cupboards, we're not teaching her anything, she's just locked out. Sometimes, with regard to perseveration, sometimes we need, I don't know if you watch The Dog Whisperer, but like Cesar Millan always talks about snapping them out of it, snapping the dog out of their state of mind. And sometimes with perseverative behaviors, we need something to snap the brain out of that perseverative state, just to break the habit. And again, that's a back-to-back behavior strategy. So for now, the locks on the door or the alarm or whatever it is, that just kind of, okay, tonight she didn't do it, tomorrow night she didn't do it, the next day she didn't do it. Has she pulled back from the habit? And then we need to come in and do a new strategy that teaches new habits. And maybe somebody needs to haunt the house with her for a night. We need to maybe simulate nighttime and role play what it is like to go to bed and not get up. There's a method of videotaping that isn't what you might think, where we videotape and then we say, you know, look what you did wrong there. It's videotaping that splices out the behavior, and they see themselves functioning as they're supposed to. It's kind of a video social story in a way. Those environmental adaptations are important, but they're not long-term solutions necessarily. We might.
That's what we're looking for ultimately, because it's affects her life. We want her to, and she gets it in every day when she's awake. She gets that she can't eat this, this, or this. She gets that she can go to juice bar at school and she can buy this and this, but not this. But in the middle of the night, even though the Nutella is on the very, very, very top back shelf, she still wakes up with chocolate all over her, and like we know she's
wow.
Nutella. So then she's adapted because we could tell, and she knew how we could tell. Now she eats it with a spoon, but she puts the spoon back in the silverware drawer. So we still know she's been in the cupboard even though we've been sound asleep.
Is she a big sugar eater?
Well, she actually has an allergy to dairy and sugar. So she shouldn't be a big sugar eater, but she craves it terribly.
Two things. I have had a child with an FASD who said that nighttime and napping is like an Etch-a-Sketch for her. And she said it offhandedly one day. She said, when I wake up, I forget who I am. And she said, it takes me a couple minutes to remember who I am. And we tested that for how long that period of amnesia actually was. And so sometimes if we get up in the middle of the night, we don't remember our allergies or the rules or whatever, and it's just like we function on reflex. And the other thing is sometimes kids wake up with an FASD, have huge glucose cravings when they first wake up. The first thing they think about is sugar. And so to consult with a doctor or nutritionist about how to have that physiological need met so that she doesn't wake up with that gigantic craving. That's a brain-based behavior. Yeah. Any suggestions? I heard you talking. Yeah?
Just satisfying the need for the child. So, like I have orders and things like that, and I'll provide them with a Tupperware, and they can fill it up with whatever they want, and that's something that they can. It's safe food. It's accessible to them, and they can satisfy. Maybe it's a sensory issue, you know, and maybe a glass of juice will do the same kind of thing.
So if I left out like a bit of peanut butter, just like my jug of peanut butter, the biggest one, can go in 2 days.
Yeah, but to set out a reasonable portion of food and food she's able to eat, lock the rest, and role play in low stakes situation that this is what's acceptable. It satisfies the need, it meets their need without saying no to everything. And then maybe work at stacking together the behavior strategies so that maybe you can leave your cupboards unlocked someday.
Put it on her bedside, have let her pick out her snack beforehand, put it there. If
Now, my question is, when it comes to a behavior cycle, is that we're focusing on what she's eating or that she's eating, but the wandering and the digging and the reaching behind might also be part of the behavior, sort of the repertoire of it, and we might think we're satisfying a part of the need, but actually the need is actually the wandering and the snooping and whatever. So maybe we need like a treasure hunt kind of, like, you know, for fun, a food treasure, I don't know. But it's important to look. We often focus on the need, in this case something that's dangerous, what she could be eating, and it's messy, you know, you wake up with a sheet full of Nutella. But the behavior actually might be bigger than that. And we might find we've got great food strategies, a little Rubbermaid tub full of peanut butter, but this other, then all of a sudden another behavior crops up because we haven't quite hit it on the head.
Right.
Just something to think about.
She does do the little search through everybody else's room as well.
Okay. Squirreling, yeah. Well, thank you so much. Again, I look forward to seeing many of you next time and in November as well. Thank you.
Carmen, we just really want to thank you so much for the fantastic, I felt it a very spirited presentation. I love your strategies. They're very practical. I'm glad you take it back to the brain. Like, this is great information for us, so thank you very much. Please note that your evaluations will be emailed to you in the next 2 business days, so make sure again that you've signed the attendance sheet. Your feedback on this session is obviously very, very important. We do a roll-up of all the evaluations at the end of the 14 sessions, so that's very important. And the next session is scheduled for October 27th at 9 a.m. with Carmen on building brain boxes. Thank you very much. Have a great day.